Good morning and welcome to this session of the Six Bridges Literary Festival, wherein we will be exploring the anthology, Our Stories, Our Voices, Our Visions, a compilation of work produced by the Read, Lead, and Level Up project at Hall High School during the 2018-2019 school year. Many of the students involved in the project were first-generation immigrants to the United States. And so the book documents their bicultural experiences, the strain of familial dislocation as parents travel ahead to the US in order to prepare a life for those that will come later, the painful leaving of relatives and known ways of life in their native countries, the awkward and sometimes fraught reunions of families, the toil of working as English language learners and acclimating to American culture, and the constant effort to justify the journey through work, both at school and at part-time jobs. In Our Stories, Our Voices, Our Visions, the narratives focus on students' past, present, and hopes for the future. Many of the stories bear witness to the difficulties and hardships some of the students face coming to the United States in search of a better life. Then, too, what is on display is the joy of the written word, expressing the humanity that resides in each of these students. These young people provide a glimpse of a new generation that is ready to change the world. First, we'll hear the voices of some of those students. Reina Cifuentes and Zachariah Alnagar submitted videos describing their involvement with the Read, Lead, and Level Up project. We'll play those videos, and then I will come back to introduce today's panelists, and we will begin our discussion around the book.
Hi, good morning. My name is Reina Cifuentes. I was born in Guatemala. I'm 19 years old. I have attended a school, Sinly Rock School District since 2015. In 2018, when I attended to Hall High School, my English teacher, Ms. Dixon, made us to write a story about our lives. A year later, a beautiful book was printed with the stories of all the students in that class. And this is why I wrote, which is part of my personal life. It's called Happy But Difficult.
My name is Zachariah Alnagar. I am Kenyan. I graduated from Hall High School in 2020. I want to share with you my story called Hard Life Makes a Creator. In the book of Hall High School, our stories, our voices, and our visions. We wrote this book in 2020. With the help of Ms. Dixon and Mr. Oliver. So my story is talking about how hard it was to live in Yemen. The title of it is Hard Life Makes a Creator, in page 40 if you want to read it. And my story is talking about how hard it was living in Yemen. And if we need a toys or buy a toys, we have to work and get money and go buy them. But at the same time, we could make them, but we did make them. So we made our toys, the toys we played with. So my toy my favorite toy I've ever made was a car. I used a old can of cooking oil, and I made its wheels from a big old pair of rubber flip-flops. And actually making the car was more fun than playing with it. It was hard to make. It takes us like hours to make it. But it actually was fun to make it. To make your own toy. So you can go to page 40 and read my story so you can know more about what I'm talking about. I think that was it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Reina and Zachariah, for adding your voices to today's panel. And now I'll be introducing today's panelists. First, we have Mr. Patrick Oliver, who is a writer, author, publisher, literary and education consultant. dedicated to promoting reading and writing as tools of empowerment. He is the founder of Say It Loud Readers and Writers, a literary arts organization created in 1997. So welcome, Patrick. Next, we have Sarah Dixon, a former teacher in the Little Rock School District who spent many years teaching students at all grade levels how to find their voice through writing. She is presently away from the classroom this year due to the reorganization of Hall High School and the prevalence of COVID-19, but she's joined us this morning. So thank you, Sarah, for being here. Next up on our panel is Mr. Randall Horton, who is a professor of English at the University of New Haven. He is also a member of the experimental performance group Heroes Are Gang Leaders, which received the 2018 American Book Award in Oral Literature. He is the only tenured full professor with 7 felony convictions. Originally from Birmingham, Alabama, he now resides in New Jersey. He recently served as editorial consultant on the project, Our Stories, Our Voices, Our Visions. So thank you, Randall, for being here. Also, Randall's latest collection of poetry, number 289-128, was published this year by the University of Kentucky Press. So thank you, Randall. And lastly, we have Ms. Edith Callaway-Frazier, who is the library and media specialist at Hall High School. As a former English teacher, she was concerned about the low literacy scores of certain students in the building. And she initiated the project that grew into Our Stories, Our Voices, Our Visions. So that is how the project was born. Good morning, Edith.
Morning. Good morning.
Okay, so I want to, actually, first off, I should encourage all of our, everyone who is watching at home to submit your questions to the panelists through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I'll be reviewing that section throughout the discussion, hoping to incorporate your questions into the discussion with the panelists. So just so you know how to communicate with us and add your questions to this dialogue. So Edith, I wanted to start with you, since you are since this is sort of your brainchild. I wondered if you could walk us through the initial germ of the idea that led to Our Stories, Our Voices, Our Visions. Were there hopes from the beginning of publishing the students' work, or is that something that just happened later on in the process? And why did you think writing in a reflective mode would help students struggling with literacy?
Well, I didn't think about publishing the book or anything. I just knew that as a former English teacher, literacy scores are important. And I just knew that if I reached out to Patrick Oliver, he would know what the next steps would be. I've been knowing Patrick since I was 19 years old, when he owned his owned Images of Africa on Main Street. This is probably before you were born, but I knew that if I called Patrick, he would be able to help me figure out what the next steps would be. And he did it. He knocked it out the park. I didn't think that we would have a book. I didn't know what he would think of. I didn't know what he would do. But when he came, he said, we're going to do a book. We're going to, they're going to write. And it's amazing. I can't believe that we have this book here, and it's at Central, it's at Wordsworth, you can order it online. It's turned into something bigger than I ever thought it could be. Right.
So Patrick, you've told me about the initial struggle with engaging students in the literary arts in the Read, Lead, and Level Up project that started at Hall. So I wanted to ask you about the pivot that happened in the course. Could you describe the transition from your initial aims of the project to what the project eventually came to be? And what unique elements did working with the ESL population at Hall bring to the workshop?
You're trying to get me in trouble first thing this morning. The project, when Edith initially brought it to me, her vision, or, we wanted to look at students at Hall High School, or Edith wanted to look at school who were kind of borderline students. We knew with a little extra push, her thinking was, we can get those students proficient. you know. And so she looked across the various areas at Hall High School, ESL, African American students, you know, all students that were in the school's population. And when we first started, we were excited because we had a very diverse population of students, you know, that represented the actual demographics of Hall High. So it was maybe about 60 to 70% African American students, maybe 20% Hispanic students, and then the other students. And we start off, you know, great, you know, until one of the instructors decided that her students and herself did, we were pushing the students a little too fast, you know, in terms of the activities. We were really challenging the students, you know. Me and Randall Horton, who we would talk to later, we always thought that let's challenge students with college level work. If they're in high school, why not prepare them for college? So in some cases, the activities and exercise we were doing with some of the students was we were pushing them to another level. And one of the teachers felt that, hey, she didn't want her students to go that fast. So we lost a tremendous population of African American students due to that decision. And we put out another call, or Edith put out another call for more students, you know, from those close to 50 students that we lost. And out of what 80-some students, maybe Edith, we started with, close to 80 to 90 students with this program. Our target was 100. We ended up with about maybe 85, and we lost 50 to 60 African American students. And put another call out, and Miss Dixon, who we'll talk to later, said, hey, I got some students, you know, that
And
I'm
Ms.
not
Johnson.
and Miss Johnson, who had some students with special needs. So we ended up with this very unique niche of special needs students and ESL students, and a few and you know, some more African American students, but not as many as we had initially. So it became a not necessarily a huge challenge, but it made me shift my game, made Edith shift her game. We looked at additional resources, and you'll talk to Miss Varela, you know, later. You'll see her video later. You know, we'll talk to her later about all the assistance we had to get to make this happen. But again, I have to give a lot of credit to Mrs. Dixon, because and she'll talk later, she knew how to reach those ESL students. But it became fun, Fred, because we used the book House on Mango Street. So the transition wasn't as difficult to the students excited, because again, the dominant population in the program ended up being Hispanic students, and we started with House on Mango Street. So a lot of traditions were referenced in the book. A lot of students were familiar with it. So they embraced the activities that we encouraged them to participate in.
Wow. So Sarah, I want to come to you next because I am really curious about how you were able to pull off this programming with students who were English language learners. I thought that was really fascinating, that you were able to bring in students who were still working on acquiring the language to also begin to try and express themselves artistically. So I wanted to ask, how did the work that the students were doing in the Read, Lead, and Level Up project, how did it differ from the traditional classroom experience?
Well, I incorporated what we did into the regular English curriculum, because as a teacher in the ESL program, my job was to teach the traditional English curriculum. I taught 9th, 12th grade, or 10th through 12th grade that year. And so part of my job was to help students transition into and better their language skills, but also it was to teach the English curriculum. I've always been the kind of teacher that does what I need to do to help students learn, and sometimes you have to go over the curriculum, around the curriculum to get that done. So while I did teach students how to write the argumentative essay for the ACT Aspire. That's just formulaic writing. It's just writing by a formula. But what's really more important to teach students is how to express themselves and how to find their own voice. And that's what I've always done as a teacher, is help students find their own voice. So this was a natural fit for these students. As Patrick said, we used House on Mango Street as a core text to work from. And so I could teach all the literary skills that are required in the curriculum, and at the same time, give students the opportunity to jump from Sandra Cisneros' narrative of her own life to think about students' own lives, students' own experience, and let them write. So when really what helped students the most and what really made this project take off was one day, for just a do now or beginning writing at the beginning of a class period, I said, think of your life as a story. Give your story a title and explain that title. That opened the floodgates. And from that writing prompt, many, many stories came out.
Wow.
About life in their country before and comparing it to their lives now, their journeys to the United States, memories of grandparents, memories of special aunts, memories of going outside and picking mangoes and that kind of thing. So it was from writing prompts. And then once those stories began to emerge, just the craft and the skill of asking students questions. What did it look like? What did it feel like? The things you do to encourage that voice to come out.
Wow. I'd also like to introduce now an additional panelist. Miss Beatriz Varela is here with us this morning. She is the secondary specialist for ESOL in the Little Rock School District. Beatriz, I wanted you to follow up on Sarah's response, because I was curious, have you seen in your work with English language learners this sort of this kind of response to reflective personal writing, as opposed to other types of writing that they might be asked to do in their English classes?
Well, and good morning, everyone. I have been working with ESL and with Ms. Dixon. I worked with Ms. Dixon for pretty much, I don't remember, Sarah, but I believe 3 years. And I have to say, I have to start with a sentence. Ms. Dixon, if it's something is resourceful, she used what she had in the classroom, because she was, she didn't mention, but she taught a class that is part of the ESL class called English Language Development. And a teacher left and she took care of the level 2s and level 3s. That was pretty tough because she has all levels combined. However, she did an amazing and fantastic job, show a lot of patience with these kids. Yes, when our students come to Hall High School was the newcomer center at the point. And what that meant is that if you came to the country with any other language than English, and we identify you as an English learner, you will come to us. And according to your level, we will give you additional class resources, such as Ms. Dixon class. And it is the other kids, the kids that are fluent, the kids that don't need classes like Ms. Dixon's, will go to regular classes. In those classes, they do write informational text, they do write maybe more biographies because they have the access. But in Ms. Dixon class, the challenging piece is that these kids they develop within 4 domains: the domain of speaking, the listening, the reading, and the writing. And in that order, they develop their skills or their abilities. They usually first listen and speak either in street language or academic language. And later on, slowly for surely, they start reading and then adding the writing. We have to say that Ms. Dixon, like she said, she went above, beyond, underneath the curriculum to accelerate this process, because she knew that the task in hand wasn't easy. Mr. Patrick, when he approached me and he told me the task, I just, when my participation was nothing compared with what Ms. Dixon and Ms. Callaway did, and needless to say, Mr. Patrick. But they have been exposed to the experience of writing. The ESL students are not exposed to the experience of writing the way that they were with Mr. Patrick because of the curriculum. We try to start with the first order domains. So this is actually a project that the kids are were motivated in ways that other kids didn't, because of course, the task in hand. I also have to say that Ms. Dixon, I don't know how many drafts she reviewed. Kids came to me with drafts, can you help me here, Ms. Varela, because Google Translator and translators in the computer are nothing compared with what these kids wanted to say. It's not about commas or grammar. Yeah. The thoughts were very different. So Miss Dixon was also, she thinks she's not bilingual, but in her brain and her heart she is. She was able to translate her heart. These kids were giving her the most, the stories that are there are the result of many corrections that, needless to say, it require English teacher, other English teachers support her. I don't know to what level she will be the one saying that, but when she was a whole of one that was Ms. Varela, I have no idea where to start. We were just sat together and work out, trying to translate the feelings, which is something that without a person like Ms. Dixon would not have been possible.
Wow. Sarah, can you talk us through sort of that edit process, those early drafts that you were working on with students, and how you were able to take them from the initial inspiration to getting those thoughts down on the page?
I wish I had known you were going to ask me this question, because I could have had a couple. It's just a matter of listening and asking more questions. Listening and asking more questions. Listening and asking more questions. And really, some of these stories just flowed so beautifully. And I can read you like a couple. Like, for instance, Frandy Beltran says, another fond memory was picking fruit. We had 2 mango trees and an avocado tree in our yard. My neighbor had some different fruit trees that we didn't have. We used to go to his land and find fruits like bananas, oranges, mandarin oranges, and a fruit that's not found in the U.S. called mamacios. It's a small green fruit with orange meat inside that is sweet and tangy. Now it's different because I have to pick fruit from the store and not from the trees like I used to. So you have these beautiful comparisons, and that just came right from the students. So many of these things just flowed out of their hearts. And bottom line, I let them express themselves, and it's what literature, it's what writing is all about. It is expressing the heart of humanity. So I'd like to read you one more if we have time.
Yes, we do.
Can read. I can read all day to you from. Here's one from Saidi Allman, And she had many of these children have experienced things that most of us growing up in the States have never had to experience. Many of their parents would leave them with relatives, come to the United States, and work for years before they could bring their children to live with them. So this is one of those experiences where Didi was left with her aunt when she was 2. And so in this paragraph, it's just so beautiful what she has to say. But it's also heartrending. When I was 10 years old, I received a call from my mother, and she said, "I became a resident of the United States, and I want you to come live with me." In that moment, my eyes shone like the sunlight. I was going to meet her, and I was excited about it. When I was at the airport, everything got serious. I was going to leave my aunt, who was like my mother. We both cried very hard, and the only words from her mouth were, "Go meet your real mother. Behave. Be strong. Remember all the things I have taught you. I love you." These words were like a knife into my heart. This day will always be in my head. I saw her eyes, the way she spoke to me, her lips a curve of sorrows. I didn't have to do anything to edit that. That poured from her heart.
Yeah, that was lovely. I some of these stories, I was astounded at the level of the narration that happened from what because I think the sort of immigration narrative lends itself so easily to the story of a journey and there being sort of a destination to get to. It was really interesting to see the way that the students were able to begin to narrate their stories. Randall, I wanted to ask you, because Patrick says that you were the initial spark behind wanting to publish the idea of him wanting to publish these writings. He also quoted you as having said, "I adamantly believe those often relegated outside the confines of literature should be able to tell their stories, to share the human condition as they see it, so that we as a society can better understand cultural experiences." So I wanted to ask you, what led to the initial exposure of these narratives to the idea that they needed to be compiled and published?
Well, I mean, I think that just sort of falls in line with what I do actively in my own professional life. I mean, I'm a writer, and I work in editorial stuff and publishing and teach creative writing. So I'm actively involved in this sort of field, right? And so I understand the idea of narratives, the importance of narratives, and as they say, the idea of the single narrative. And so for me, and of course, the other part of it is Patrick and I have done countless of projects around working with kids from all kind of situations, and so the part of that outcome is a book, is their writing, are their stories, and the way in which we compile them and tell them. So it wasn't like, I mean, we've had a history of this for like a few years. So it's that clip too. And also when you look at it, you put it up against the lens of what's going on now in terms of socially, historically, right? And looking at the whole idea of immigration, and then you buttress that against the idea of the coming of age narrative, right? And so you got those two things going on at the same time with these kids. And it's a narrative often that's not necessarily true. I mean, we know about these things and we've heard, you hear some of these stories, but I think these kids offer a different lens in terms of, where they are, their history, where they come from, and some of the things I think we take for granted or don't think that's important, that's really important to them in terms of their memory, right? And so all of this is, so when I'm looking at these things, I'm thinking like, these are the stories that we don't hear. And as someone who's invested in telling these stories, this is the reason why it's so practical. Like this is like a book, and because they bring to life these kids' narrative in a way that's relevant to right here, right now, which was stunning to me,
Yeah.
So
yeah. I was really astounded, again, returning to what you said, what you mentioned, Randall, about some of these stories touching on the national conversation about immigration. One of the students talked about their journey to the United States, and I wanted to share what they wrote. They said, Mexico became very immense to us because we had to go through all of Mexico. And if the police looked at us there and asked us where we were from, we could go back to our country with a deportation order. That's why we only advanced at night and early in the morning. We had to talk very little there because otherwise they would recognize us by our accent and people would hand us over to the police. After several days in Mexico, we finally reached the border of the United States. We arrived at night. The next day at dawn, we had to pass through a river and we would be in the USA. We all passed through the river, although the trip was scary because we had been told that several people had drowned there. Several of my family and I could not swim. So throughout this collection, you hear students just describing crossing rivers into the US, guided by men known as quixotes, which we've heard about in the news. You hear about the fear of being picked up by Border Patrol agents. You hear about spending nights in the freezer or detention centers that are kept at frigidly cold temperatures. So it was really incredible to see the level of detail and the sort of first-person accounts that you were getting from students. I wanted to, I got a question in the Q&A, and I think it makes sense right here. And so I wanted to share it with, it's an open question to anyone on the panel. Kathleen King writes, beautiful project. How did these stories inspire you as panelists to look at your own personal stories newly from when you were their age and even now?
And I responded to Kathleen. I don't know if I can expand now. I responded to Kathleen saying, because of my background, I can relate to the stories. But one thing that I'm pretty sure Ms. Dixon, Ms. Callaway will understand more than anyone. The background, what they bring is they never get rid of their identity, but they also add, some of them add other identities. They come with their, I am the immigrant identity. They step to the I am or I am American, or I am a student, or I am the other identity. That step, which research says that it might take up to 2 years because they spend pretty much 2 years in silence. It was exploded in this book, in these stories, in a way that it was fascinating. Those examples that Ms. Dixon read, Ms. Dixon and I know the story behind those stories, and literally I'm picturing each one of these kids. One thing that I have to say, when I called them to record the reading for this book, I don't know what number of people I called, but majority of them say, I told Ms. Dixon, I can do anything, including writing, but being in the camera. That was hilarious because Zachariah, that's something that people that is in this call need to know. Zachariah was so outspoken.
Yeah.
I had tears to see that. Reina took me a little while, but girls, boys, that problem. But these kids, all of them had their book, which I was surprised. Thank you, Ms. Dixon, by the way, because I know you also did this possible. But they were ready to meet if I put my cell phone in front of them, which I couldn't do because of Corona. But the ones that didn't in Zoom or the Reina, it was hard to get them expressed. And that was something that really caught my attention, because the harder piece was the book. Now the harder piece was, they told me, tell Ms. Dixon that I told her that I am not gonna be in camera anymore. Mr. Oliver took us to Central High School for an event, and they read in front of a mini group. and they were quote unquote okay with that. But going in TV like this situation, there was a no. That's really something to mention.
Yeah, that's hilarious. I mean, I can empathize with that as a writer. The luxury of the distance of the written word. So you write something and you can give it to someone and they get a chance to sort of consume it in their own way on their own time, and you don't have to be exposed to their initial response. Ms. Dixon, you talked about using Google Translator as a tool in the classroom, and I wondered, does working through a textual medium like that technology rather than relying on vocal communication impact the way that students approach writing?
I think, well, it gave them a freedom.
Okay.
Knowing they could write in their own language and then it could be translated and then we could talk about it.
Okay. Okay.
It gave a freedom to express themselves.
Okay.
If I had said, write this in English, they would have really struggled and that would have stopped them from writing. But if I would just say, you can write it in your own language, because I also had students that were Chinese, students from Yemen, students from Thailand. So if I let them write in their own language and it be translated, and then we could talk about it once it's translated, it made the process easier and it made them be able to express. It allowed them to express themselves in a way that if they had just been asked to write it in English first, it just gave them a freedom.
You also,
hey Fred, to piggyback off that too, we saw some amazing sharing of skills and talent, because some of the students that were in the class were students who actually just came to the country and their English wasn't as good as some of the other students. And in a lot of the writing activities, we saw students in the editing process, we saw students assisting each other, you know, in terms of interpreting the language. We saw them sharing headphones, so, you know, so they can make sure that they were getting the lessons. So we also saw some really dynamic learning experiences happening, you know, in terms of, you know, students, again, sharing their skills, you know, students who were, you know, somewhat fluent in English were sharing with the students who were, you know, again, just, you know, coming to the country, who were, they were decent English speakers. They still had challenges, but we saw this coming together, you know, helping each other out. She mentioned the Chinese student. He challenged me to learn about how to use my phone better to interpret in Chinese. He showed me, he said, hey, it's all of it, just go to this, you know, and so I was able to share with him, you know, and he was fascinated. He had a good time in the class because all of a sudden he found a way of sharing his story. So it was a very diverse group, but back to Ms. Dixon's point, you know, the technology, you know, played a role in the process. And again, we all learned something different and new.
Edith, I wanted to come back to the text that Patrick chose to expose the students to. He talked about using House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros, the classic vignette collection. And he also used Dear Martin by Nick Stone, a novel about a Black boy that was racially profiled by the police. And so I wondered how you thought exposing students to narratives where they might see themselves help them toward the initial aim of impacting literacy throughout the school.
Well, it allowed them to think back and, you know, to whether or not they could relate to that, because a large part of writing involves making those connections. Sometimes students, you know, when you say write about a certain topic, if they can't think of anything to write, they're just stumped. But if you give them an option to read something and connect to it, then they can think, well, yeah, I can relate to that. And then they can think of some things that they can write. We didn't really get to explore Dear Martin the way we wanted to, but yeah, we're gonna, hopefully we can do that at some point with another group, because I want to continue with this project.
Yeah.
Last year we were kind of slowed down because of COVID, and we didn't get a chance to really, explore that as much as we wanted to for a second year. But I really do want to try to get that initial group that Patrick and I attempted to start with early on, the African American students, and maybe we can explore that a bit more with Dear Martin.
Okay. Yeah,
So yeah,
Patrick,
it's all about connections. It's all about making those real world connections.
I love that point that you make, Edith, about even writers who feel like they have nothing to say. When you give them something, an object to sort of ping their brain off of, then it begins to bring up things that that might be worth exploring in writing. So I love that description of the process. Patrick, was that your intent in bringing in making the reading selections that you made?
Most certainly, cultural competence, cultural relevancy, cultural responsive learning. I mean, that's what Edith said. When you're familiar with something, you can respond better to it. And that's, what the House on Mango Street, I'm so glad that we accidentally started with that book. Not accidentally, we started that book first. But, Edith told about the population at Hall High School. And when I started, it was in September. So it's like Hispanic Heritage Month is coming up. So why not use that selection? And again, she had told about the Hispanic population at Hall. So we decided to start with that book, and the timing worked out. So, and then obviously Dear Martin is a fantastic text by Nick Stone. And I knew that the students of color would love that book. And he did do a trial run with a small group of students, and they were fascinated by it, they enjoyed it. So, that was the reason for selecting those two texts. It's really what was about cultural relevance.
And if you allow me to piggyback
Please.
on that, to put together Edith and Patrick thoughts, the book itself the author is a person that with Hispanic heritage, and she was born, I don't remember where, but she's Hispanic. What I'm trying to say is that the book was intentionally aimed to given to these classes for the purpose of captivating them using their background the same way that the author did. So Ms. Dixon has this resource, and of course she used it because she's fantastic. But that the book, I think, inspired them, because the book is really intentional in the chapters. Each chapter talk about when she went to the supermarket and when she did a specific activities. And I'm pretty sure that also put it together what Edith was saying. If you connect them to the background, which the book did, it will help them to write. So I just want to add that information.
That's really cool, because one of the interesting themes that I found throughout the piece was the boredom that some students express feeling with their lives in the U.S. And that seemed like equal parts like typical teenage ennui, and also some of the isolation one might feel in a foreign culture. So I wonder, was there special attention given to encouraging the students to explore the mundanity of their lives? And it sounds like already embedded in House on Mango Street, there was a attempt made by Cicernos to capture just regular pedestrian everyday moments in their life. But I wonder what strategies that you all use, perhaps Ms. Dixon, you might want to speak to this. What strategies did you all use to encourage the students not to look past those everyday feelings and expressions?
Well, a strategy would be like reading like a particular chapter of House on Mango Street. Like seeing just on the surface, just a funny little story about three girls finding 3 pair of high heels and putting on those high heels and walking down the street. These are girls that are preteen, but they put on these high heels, and suddenly, for the first time, they are sexually objectified.
Uh-huh.
So the story on one level is funny of these girls planking down the street in high heels and all of a sudden feeling grown up, but getting the attention from men as sexual objects. And so you have this profound story. I mean, you know, this profound, oh, look what happens when we put on high heels. So you have this profound insight. And so, you know, sometimes the kids would realize when they're writing just about the mundane, they're really writing more than about the mundane.
Right.
It's those moments in life that you,
Right. We have some questions coming in the Q&A section. And Randall, I really wanted to turn to you to ask you about the publication process. What was it like organizing this anthology? I know you probably have much experience putting together collections of poetry, but was this project similar? Did you learn anything different during this project? What was the project like of compiling the stories together?
You're on mute.
Randall, you're muted.
Anyway, I've done a few anthologies. So working with prose and poetry and critical writing and all that kind of stuff in a mix is not necessarily, you know, anything new that I'm new to. And with this, with this project, for me, it was about letting the stories tell themselves, regardless of age, where a person came from, or all of that. I'm looking for the threads. And for me, I'm also editing, doing some of the final edits, making some of the decisions on what needs to be taken out, what needs to be in, what needs to be kept in, what is so important that it has to be there. We need to make that work, or what is something. So there was some little things like that, and also like what starts the narrative off, and how do we exit the narrative, and how are we building towards something, and how are we getting out of something. I think all of that becomes, so for me, the kids are sort of basically working with micro-fiction and flash fiction, although some are actually doing, more essay style, some did longer writing. And so for me, I'm looking at those things, in terms of rethinking about the title. So like I'm taking them through the editorial process. So I'm not, it's just like, we do with Patrick, when we do workshops and we give kids material, I'm giving them things that I think are applicable. So I wanted to edit them in the same way. And because I wanted them, because their piece was going to be somewhere in a publication, and I wanted them to be proud of that then and 20 years from now, and have that same pride, right? So all of those things come into play. But the narrative is more so important than anything. And, I'm looking for, like I said, like in any of the editorial decisions in terms of what needed to sort of like maybe not be there, I'm thinking about how much it meant to that person to write that before I make that decision, or even recommend that decision or something like that. So all those things are sort of like happening. Like.
Got you. So Janae asks, once the book was published, how did the young writers respond to seeing their words in print? How was this publication moment celebrated with them, and did it include their families?
Edith?
Now, we tried to host an event back in the spring, and we were going to invite the families, the governor, and then COVID happened. So we weren't able to really do anything. And I think that's the holdup right now.
I mean, it's really, we have not had the opportunity to celebrate this with the students, and only a few students have this book in their hand because of COVID. So COVID kept us from being able to have the kind of celebration once the book was able to be in their hands.
Right.
Just have it in their hands right now.
Wow.
Yeah.
I guess the COVID is doing that to all of our lives right now. But I am also curious to know how the young writers are going to respond to seeing their words in print. Were they told that this process was going to happen, and how did that maybe impact the way that they were working on this particular project?
They didn't really know until almost the end of the semester that there was the possibility of it being put into, book form.
Mm-hmm.
So they were excited by that, but their motivation initially was they knew they were in a class and they were writing for a class.
Mm-hmm.
And they were telling their stories, and they enjoyed. There was just such satisfaction of seeing their stories come to life and sharing them with each other.
Mm-hmm.
That in itself was intrinsic motivation.
Mm-hmm.
Then knowing that it was going to be in a book was just like the extra.
Yeah.
Well, with this particular demographic of student, it seems like whatever they need to do to learn the language, they do it.
Mm-hmm.
So language acquisition is pretty much primary for them anyway.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And another thing Randall mentioned earlier, that we had worked on a number of projects together.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things I did, me and Randall, I think we've published about 5-6 books together now, Randall. And so I took 3 or 4 of those publications to one of our classes one day,
Mm-hmm.
and I passed them around to the students, and I showed them. I said, "Hey, this is what we're considering doing." And
Wow.
we shared those anthologies from the other programs that me and Randall had did together of other students, and they got fascinated by that. So it's like, okay, they're not just saying this; we actually see the product of other students our age who are published,
Mm-hmm.
and they got focused on those anthologies from other students. That they were trying to do a writing activity. They were so caught up in reading the other students' works.
Oh,
So
wow.
that became another prompt as well for them to really work on their writing, because they saw other students from other writing projects whose works were published.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, like Ms. Dixon said, they thought it was just regular curriculum. They were just writing. We were just kind of just pulling them, dragging them along, promising we're going to publish, and we weren't going to do it. But then again, when I showed them the works that we had done in the past, it really was another motivation.
Right.
And one of the things that Patrick said to the students that we used as a refrain throughout the time we were together was, if you don't tell your own story, someone else will, and it may not be your truth.
Yeah.
And so we used that as a refrain over and over. And so the students knew, I'm telling my truth.
Mm-hmm.
And that was important to them.
And Reina Cifuentes said that the motivation was exactly those words that you just said, Ms. Dixon. So you obviously emphasize that a lot. I have to say, I have a couple of students came to me when they knew about the book, which is recent, right before the corona hit. They were concerned about the status, the immigration status, because the book is going to be published. They wanted to know if being so honest and open will, if mom is going to kill me because now I said that I crossed the border. That was hilarious, because those are conversations that you have to, one of the advantages of teaching these kids and being with their background is that you can go one-on-one with them and telling them that the opportunities, if they take the opportunities, they will move forward. And this is just another opportunity. I clarify for them. It had nothing to do with immigration or ICE. They were really concerned about me talking about Mexican, and they're gonna tell me that I have to leave because I wrote a book. And that was kind of funny. But the conversation clarified for them. We had an adult conversation, a couple, it was 3 of them in my office, because those are not conversations that you're going to have in the in the classroom. Those are not, besides the administration in the school wouldn't support this effort. So what I did is engage them, try to explain them the collaborative process of putting together a piece that is going to represent the ESL classes. Unfortunately, like Patrick said, it didn't happen with the whole initial 100 kids. The fact that he did it with 85 kids, at least for us, and these kids, they were very proud. Each child that I called, even though they didn't have the book, they knew about the book and they read the story. One thing about Hispanic population is that we, the collaboration and cooperation piece isn't there every day. Like they love small groups or group activities rather than individual ones, because that's the orientation that they brought from their schools in their countries. So they embrace that, and of course, Ms. Dixon embraced that in a bit because she is very knowledgeable about those pieces, cultural pieces that she needs to implement in her classroom in order to be successful.
I'm so glad that we have segued now to thinking about the dangers of someone telling your story and the importance of you taking the ownership of telling your own story. So I wanted to ask, and this is just an open question, what are the things that are potentially lost in allowing someone else to tell one's own story? And I guess I should ground that, because earlier this year there was a bit of a controversy around a novel that received a lot of acclaim, American Dirt, by Janine Cummins, and a lot of writers wrote in saying that Janine was misrepresenting the story of undocumented immigrants coming into the United States. So I wondered if anybody wanted to speak to how this program aimed to work against that erasure.
Come on, Randall.
Well, I mean, I think those are almost two different things.
Okay.
In a way, and though they're not. I mean, for me, I don't have a problem with other writers exploring other things. I mean, I think it's what we're supposed to do with writers. So I'm there with that, because I know writers that take on other projects to step outside of themselves to imagine other things.
Right.
And I'm thinking about particularly Patricia Smith, who writes a poem about a skinhead. So she steps into the voice of a skinhead and delivers a damaging critique. You know what I mean? So I don't want to stop that. But with that said, I think American Dirt was more so lazy writing in a lot of ways too. And I do think there is a sort of, there's always a danger in someone telling your story. But for me, if a person isn't embodying that project, I think they need that exercise and be able to show and understand that, show that empathy, that care, and all of those little nuances. And if you can't, then I think there may be something that you shouldn't sort of attempt to do. There are just certain things I just wouldn't do as a writer. I step outside of myself and do things, but I think I can get close to what I'm trying to get to, if not all the way there with that. So I do have, for me, it's a little bit, it's interesting, but for these kids, it's like, they need to understand the idea of telling the story, because I think you're also operating within historical silence too, and historical erasure in terms of narratives, right? So there's all of these things at play. So I don't want to handcuff the creative person, because then you're not creative anymore, right? You know what I'm saying? So, and at the same time, I do want to pay attention to what people are writing and then hold them to the fire and account and be accountable for when they don't when they don't do what they're supposed to do. You know what I mean? Just like, I think American Dirt was a great example of that. But even before it got to that point, there were people telling them that this wasn't the book to be. Right. So I think there's, so you have to follow the history of, like, even to get here, and then the defiance of that to even publish it, to say, oh, this is what the public is going to be able to take and not going to say anything about it. We don't live in that world anymore.
Right.
In a lot of ways, right?
Right.
So I think though, you know, that force will probably balance itself out. So that's why I say it's loaded, because me as a creative writer, I dare like cringe to try to tell someone how to explore their creativity.
Yeah.
And then I think you're going to stamp that if you tell them you can't step outside of yourself, because that's the whole point of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so, yeah, I don't know.
Well, unfortunately, that is all of our time this morning. So I just wanted to.
Oh, I thought we had 2 hours.
I just wanted to thank all of our Sarah Dixon, Patrick Oliver, Edith Callaway-Frazier, Randall Horton, and Beatriz Varela. Thank you all so much for being here with us this morning. If there was a comment in the chat that we did not respond to, we will try and respond to it. I hope that we got everything covered, and I just wanted to say thank you again to everyone for tuning in to this session of the Six Bridges Literary Festival. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you, Frederick.